Hello everyone and welcome again to my channel. And today we will continue the last lesson about the classical era music, and this is about the classical era composers. For our most essential learning competency, at the end of the lesson you'll be able to relate classical music to other art forms and its history within the era and improvise appropriate accompaniment to selected music from the classical period. As for our objectives, analyze and relate the life and selected musical compositions of composers from the classical era, listen to samples of selected musical compositions, and create a composition based on the themes of music by the classical era composers. By the way, if you are new to my channel, this is a channel that covers different music content like music covers, tutorials, and discussions, and I also upload grade 9 MAPE lectures. I would greatly appreciate if you will subscribe and hit that bell button in support to all my efforts. So let's get started. So the classical period was a time when entertaining tuneful music was trendy. Composers strove to write music that went straight to the heart instead of challenging listeners with too much complexity from the music of the Baroque period. Classical period also happened to produce the three of the most famous composers. They are Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. And as a reaction to the excessively fancy music of the Baroque era, classical musicians like Mozart and Haydn prepared balanced structure, clear organization, and simple melodies. They established the rules for music that provided a framework for compositions, such as si Haydn, nag-compose siya more on sa symphony, and si Mozart naman, siya naman na nag-standardize ng format ng opera. So let us study the life of these three famous composers from the classical era. First, who is Franz Joseph Haydn? Franz Joseph Haydn was the oldest of the three and a friend and mentor of Mozart and Beethoven. He was born on March 31, 1732 in Rohrau, Austria, and died May 31, 1809 in Vienna. At the age of 7, he embarked on a musical education, working as a choir boy at St. Peter's Cathedral in Vienna, which is a musical epicenter during the time of the classical period. So in 1761, Haydn started a job as a music director at the court of a Hungarian aristocrat named Prince Paul Esterházy. And his job was to be the Esterházy's family iPad. Kumbaga, his role is to write music for his orchestra, and at the same time, siya yung nag-organize ng mga concerts for them as a leader or the music director of the large group of staff musicians. He was known as a warm, kind director, and his orchestra loved him so much, he was even nicknamed Papa Haydn. And Haydn once quoted, "I prefer the humorous side of life," and this was evident in most of his compositions. This is actually apparent in one of his popular compositions, the Symphony No. 94 in G, also known as Surprise, which is rumored to wake up the sleepers in the audience. And another comic composition of Haydn was the Symphony No. 45 in F sharp minor, also known as the Farewell Symphony, wherein the last movement calls for the musicians to stop playing one by one and leave the stage. Kasi parang they said na yung daw concert na yon na pinaperforma ng orchestra ni Haydn is sobrang tagal na nila, sobrang haba na nung kanilang concert. Kaya yung last part ng farewell, isa-isa na sila nagwo-walk out. Kaya doon, sa mga composition na ito, makikita natin yung humorous side ni Franz Joseph Haydn. But even though meron siyang humorous side, we know that Haydn is very serious in terms of his music. He wrote about 104 symphonies or multi-movement works for the orchestra, and that includes the Farewell Symphony and the Surprise Symphony. And because of that, he was labeled by his contemporaries as the father of symphony. Before kasi hindi naman nag-exist yung mga symphony na yan. Why? Kasi yung symphony is a multi-movement work that doesn't exist during the time of the Baroque period. So si Haydn ang nag-standardize ng isang symphony, and at the same time, siya din ang nag-standardize ng bilang ng mga members ng isang symphony orchestra. That is why he was called as the father of symphony. He also wrote 68 string quartets, or a piece written for 2 violins, a viola, and a cello, and it includes the Choke Quartet. Some scholars even believe that Haydn invented the string quartet form. So despite the rules that were imposed in composition during his time, Haydn was a great innovator and inventor of styles in composition, and that includes the symphony and the quartet. So he experimented freely with various orchestral combinations and instrumental techniques, and he died in 1809 at the age of 77. Among the three composers, si Haydn talaga yung pinaka-successful yung musical career. And so, some of his famous works are the Symphony Number 85 in B-flat major, also known as the Rain or the Queen, and Symphony Number 94 in G major, also known as the Surprise Symphony. And we have the Emperor Quartets, also known as String Quartet in C major, Opus 76 Number 3. And lastly, we have the Symphony Number 100 in G major, also known as the Military Symphony. So let us listen to some of the samples of his famous works. Now let's proceed to the second most popular composers from the classical era. So his name is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who was born in January 27, 1756 in Salzburg, Austria, and died December 5, 1791. So he was considered as one of the most amazing child prodigies in history. As a child, he was able to play the harpsichord and violin, improvise fugues, write meanway, and read music perfectly at sight. Imagine that, bata pa lang si Mozart, nakakapag-compose na siya ng mga music at nakakapag-perform na siya sa mga aristocrats. He also composed a symphony at the age of 8, an oratory at the age of 11, and a full opera at the age of 12. And then he also toured throughout the Europe and performed at the courts of famous aristocrats during that time. And he was even knighted by the Pope at the age of 14 after transcribing by ear the choral piece exclusively performed by the famous Sistine Chapel Choir during the Holy Week in Rome. So ganon ka lupit si Mozart. Nakakapag-transcribe siya ng isang pakinigan lang ng mga piyesa. Kaya nga yun ang dahilan kung bakit siya ginawang knight ng Pope at the age of 14. Kasi yung kanyang musical ability is talagang sobrang taas. And then when he was 15, Mozart returned to his hometown that was currently ruled by a tyrant Prince Archbishop Hieronymus Colloredo. So si Hieronymus Colloredo, siya yung Prince Archbishop na tyrant na kasalukuyang namumuno dun sa Vienna, which is the hometown of Mozart. And then the Archbishop refused to acknowledge Mozart's genius and only granted him as a subordinate seat in the court orchestra. So kung ikaw ay isang child prodigy at child celebrity, di ba, nagtutour kung saan-saan panig ng mundo, nakahurt talaga sa pride ni Mozart yung hindi pag-consider sa kanya, yung hindi pag-acknowledge sa kanya nitong Prince Archbishop Colloredo nito. And that is the reason why, over the next decade, his father tried to find a better position for his son elsewhere, but with no success. And this resulted in his gradual downfall as an international celebrity. Kasi lagi nagkakaroon ng conflict si Mozart at saka yung Prince Archbishop nung kanyang pinagtatrabahuhan. So, nag-decide siya na magiging freelance musician na lang siya or freelance composer na lang siya. And then the earlier years of his career is in Vienna were indeed successful. Marami siyang mga kilalang mga estudyante na tinuturuan, nakakapag-perform siya ng solo sa iba't ibang panig ng Vienna, and his works were even published. And his German opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio and Marriage of Figaro, were acclaimed. And he was even praised by Haydn, acknowledging him as the greatest composer that he knew. Imagine that even si Haydn, na isa na sa mga pinakamagagaling na composer so panahon na yun, in-acknowledge niya si Mozart na pinakamagaling na composer na kilala niya sa buong buhay niya. So ganun naging successful yung career ni Mozart after niyang umalis sa kanyang patron. Pero kahit na itong Figaro na opera niya ay na-acknowledge ng emperor as a masterwork, it was also denounced as inappropriate. So parang ganito, pinuri ng emperor yung masterwork na ito na Figaro. Sabi niya, oh, maganda yung masterwork mo, yung Marriage of Figaro. Pero parang hindi yata ito para yatang hindi bagay ito sa mga nasasakupan ko. And because of that comment, parang unti-unti parang nasira yung career ni Mozart because of that. Kasi syempre, nag-comment ng hindi maganda yung emperor sa kanya, kaya parang unti-unti na nag-decline din yung kasikatan niya. So Vienna considered Mozart's music as complicated with too much dissonance and hard to follow. And his pupils declined and the elites no longer supported his concert. So unti-unti siyang nalaos. So during his last year, he was commissioned to compose 2 operas for the Viennese Theater, which is The Magic Flute and The Clemency of Titus. Itong dalawang commissioned operas na to, pinagsabay ni Mozart ito kasi kinakailangan at same time may ipasa niya. At alam naman natin kung gaano kahirap maggawa ng isang opera. Sa lahat ng mga musical forms, ang opera talaga ang pinakamahirap kasi meron siyang kasamang theater, may kasamang ballet, and at the same time meron siyang kasamang music. So sobrang hirap gawin ng isang opera. And 2 opera yung pinagsasabay ni Mozart noong mga huling taon niya. So while hard at work, he even received an anonymous commission to compose a requiem. When we say requiem, ito yung tugtog or music na pinapatugtog sa mga namatay na o sa malapit ng iburol or ilibing. So having all his health and career problems, he dedicated the requiem to himself. His requiem was unfinished. So this requiem was commissioned anonymously, and even Mozart think that itong requiem na to is para sa kanya, hindi talaga dun sa anonymous commissioner na nagpagawa nitong requiem. And then, 2 months before his death, The Magic Flute was premiered with a resounding praise in Vienna. Kaya lang, the sad news is that although naging successful itong pagpipremiere ng Magic Flute, yung income niya is dumating na ng huli. Kasi namatay na si Mozart bago nila na-receive yung commission dun sa Magic Flute. Namatay na siya due to rheumatic fever on December 5, 1791, and he was unceremoniously buried in a common grave, as was the custom of his era in the St. Mark's Cemetery, just outside the Vienna city limits. And Mozart was only 35 years old during that time. Para malaman nyo yung kabuoang kwento ditong buhay ni Mozart, I suggest na panoorin nyo yung movie na Amadeus. Doon makikita nyo kung gaano siya kagaling at kung ano yung naging reason bakit siya nagkaroon ng downfall sa kanyang musical career. Pero among the 3 composers, si Mozart at saka si Beethoven talaga yung mas sumikat. In fact, even until now, yung mga composition ni Mozart is sobrang sikat pa rin. Alam pa rin natin. Maaring di natin alam yung title. Pero familiar tayo dun sa melody ng mga composition ni Mozart. And some of the most famous compositions of Mozart are, first is the Eine kleine Nachtmusik, also known as K525. And the second is yung Queen of the Night aria from The Magic Flute, his last opera. And then we have the unfinished Requiem Mass in D minor, K626. And lastly, we have the Turkish March, also known as the Rondo alla Turca, Piano Sonata number 11 in A major, K331. Yeah. So let's listen to some of the sample works of Mozart. And so last but not the least, we have Ludwig van Beethoven, who was born on December 17, 1770 on Bonn, Germany, and he died March 26, 1827 in Austria. So Ludwig van Beethoven was a passionate composer who mastered the elegant classical style, then pushed it to its limit. So Beethoven grew up in Bonn, Germany, and his father's alcoholism created a challenging childhood for young Beethoven. So, si Beethoven at saka si Mozart, halos parang magkasabayan lang sila ng age at even ng musical career. Pero nakakatawa sa kanilang kwento, kung si Mozart nag-start siya ng maganda, si Beethoven nag-start siya ng hindi maganda, ng pangit, ng tragic. Kasi yung papa niya, lagi siyang binubugbog dahil nga alcoholic, and at the same time, naiinggit kasi yung papa ni Beethoven sa papa ni Mozart. Yung kasing papa ni Mozart, parang if-reflex niya yung anak niya na isang music genius kung saan-saan. And aside from that, si Beethoven kasi hindi siya pinanganak na merong musical talent. Unlike kay Mozart na parang bata pa lang, genius na siya. So, ka-flex talaga yung talent niya. Si Beethoven, di siya ganon. So, after nung mamatay ang papa niya, nagsimula siyang lumipat sa Vienna noong 1792 at doon siya nag-study ng composition with Haydn and began working as a pianist and teacher for aristocratic patrons. So si Beethoven, saka lang lumabas yung musical talent niya, pagiging genius niya nung namatay na yung papa niya. And then doon na siya nagsimula mag-aral at maging pianista. So ang start talaga ng career nito si Beethoven, he was actually a performer, a pianist. And minsan nagtuturo din siya sa mga patrons, aristocratic patrons. And then when Beethoven was in his 20s, something happened that would ruin his piano career but jumpstart his composing. And that is that he began to lose his hearing. Sabi nga doon, sa isa sa mga, sabi niya, highly gangstad testament na kung saan meron siyang pinapadala ng mga sulat sa kanyang kababatang kapatid. Kinuwento niya doon yung nagdadaanan niyang emotional crisis noong 1802. Why? Kasi meron siyang nagdaanan na matinding depression. Sabi nga doon, ikinonfess niya yung kanyang depression caused by his disability, yung kanyang hearing disability, but also his determination to find hope through sharing music to the world. Through his symphonies, piano sonatas, and other works, Beethoven injected classical style with a new level of dramatic intensity. So makikita natin sa mga composition ni Beethoven, yung latter part ng buhay niya, yung simula nun ng 20s pataas, na kung saan nagsisimula na siyang mabingis. So inabandon niya na yung kanyang pagiging pianista at nagsimula na siyang maging composer, maging writer. Yan, maririnig natin sa music ni Beethoven, nag-change yung sound ng music niya. First reason is that hindi niya na kasi talaga naririnig yun. Diba? Hindi niya na naririnig yung kanyang composition. He just wrote it down based sa kanyang nai-imagine, sa kanyang nararamdaman. And then sabi dito, his challenging life became as legendary as his music. And later, composers looked to him as a model of a brand new concept, the idea that music can express a composer's own personal story. Yan. Beethoven's life and music helped inspire a musical trend called Romanticism, in which narrative, originality, and emotion were all important. So he started Romanticism in music in early 1820s, completely rebelling against the standards of classical music. So tandaan natin ang classical music, it is very strict in terms of its standards. Kinakailangan balanse, kinakailangan simple, kinakailangan ganito lang yung form ng composition na gagawin mo. Pero si Beethoven, nung nag-start yung 1820s, completely nagrebel din na siya dun sa ganong klaseng konsepto at nagsimula na siyang mag-compose ng panibagong style. Yun ang ngayon, which is we call it Romanticism. So his death in 1827 marked the end of classical era in music and his contribution to both eras in Western music, the classical era and Romantic era, gave him the title, the giant who bridged the two eras. So, ilan sa mga sikat na composition ni Beethoven is yung Four Elise, and then the other is yung Symphony Number 9 in C minor, yung dan 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 dan. Ayan. And then we have the Moonlight Sonata or Piano Sonata number 14 in C sharp minor. And last is yun na nga yung sinasabi ko sa inyo na Choral Symphony number 9, Opus 125. Yeah, so let us listen to some of the samples of Beethoven's famous work. So that's the end of our discussion, and I hope that you learned something from our topic for today. I would love to interact with you guys, so please share your takeaways, comments, and questions on the comment box. So please leave a like and share this video to support to my channel. Always keep safe and healthy and stay awesome. So have a great day.